So, Paul Kenyon, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today about one book of yours that really stirs interest and passions, I would say, in Romania, in Britain as well, because it concerns us Romanians. We are talking about The Children of the Night, the strange and epic story of modern Romania. My first question is, what makes it strange and what makes it epic?
Well, that's a very good question. I think strange because it's supposed to evoke something of that the sort of old literature around Bram Stoker and the Gothic movement of that time. And even though I know a lot of Romanians aren't particularly comfortable with mentions of Vlad Dracula, the point is that if it goes in that direction, if it's sort of encased in that kind of packaging, that verbal packaging, if you like, to call it strange, near and people see that on the front of the book, I think that's good. So it gives it that Gothic feeling anyway. So strange in that sense, don't worry, no insult to Romanians, but also strange is actually it's quite a tempting thing for readers to try and engage with, because they think if you said, the very neutral, straightforward story of Romania, obviously nobody's going to be interested, but it is strange from where I'm sitting in Western Europe. So strange because of that, heroic, epic, because I think people need to understand that Romania is so multi-dimensional. They've got to understand, they can't just think that Romania begins with Ceausescu. They have to understand all those extraordinary years during Antonescu, further back during Queen Marie, all the high society of Romania during the sort of Belle Epoque era. And I want people to understand and soak up the richness of the country. So, and also heroic, because of course, as you know, Romania on that very important fault line between East and West, between Russia and Europe, and always has these sort of repeating historical issues with which side to choose in a great conflict. Who does it go with, Germany or Russia? Who does it go with, the old Ottoman Empire, or does it go with the West? It's always had these problems. So problems which I obviously, as an author and a journalist, think are fantastically exciting to dig into and to explain to people who know nothing about Romania.
As a matter of fact, the book retraces the Romanian country's history, starting with Vlad Dracula, Vlad the Impaler, and going up to the 1989 revolution. Why this beginning and why this end?
Well, again, that's a really good question. I had to think long and hard about starting the book with Vlad Tepes. And the reason I did it is because if you speak to people, I'm afraid, outside Romania about the history of the country, a lot of them, one of the only recognizable names is Vlad Tepes. They will have heard of Ceausescu, but I didn't want to start with him for all the reasons we can imagine. So I think in order to attract a new audience so that people will understand the greater history of Romania, you need to start with Vlad Tepes. You need to tell the story of why actually he's a national hero to some people in Romania and what some of his politics were, and actually how important he was to the future of Christian Europe at the time. You know, people just think he's this bogeyman that is something to do with Bram Stoker, and it's all been exaggerated over time. But actually, to understand he was a real living person and the historical context within which he was fighting against the Ottoman Empire, I think all that is really important. Why did I finish with Ceausescu? Well, there's a couple of very brief answers to that. I finished in 1989 because it was a natural pause, and I thought the change thereafter is so seismic with Romania, it requires another book. So I've left my way open to writing another book about Romania.
That's a smart move. Yes, congratulations on that.
And you know, I'm afraid, and you will understand this as well as a writer and a journalist, it is in some ways, my job is to write about dead people. I mean, it is easier to write about dead people who won't sue. And this is particularly important when writing about Romania. Everybody who comes into the frame immediately after Ceausescu, obviously many of them are still alive, including Iliescu. I'd love to dig into all that. I'm not frightened about him. There are certain politicians who came after him who I'd like to really dig into and tell the truth about. And I would be wrapped up in lawsuits for the rest of my life.
You first came to Romania in 1994. Thinking about what you've seen and experienced back then and the way Romania presents and represents itself today, would you say the journey was rather short or long?
What, my journey or Romania's journey?
Probably Romania's journey in the first place. Then, if it has common points with your particular journey, then the more the better.
Well, I think that Romania's journey has been actually exceptionally fast. It won't feel like that way in Romania. But if you think of a situation where, obviously, during Ceausescu, you don't have anybody who knows how to operate democratic institutions. You don't have anybody who understands how to run elections or how to have a sort of civic society. Civic society is so important to the West. And if you start from, I'm afraid to say, this sounds awful, but start pretty much from zero in that realm, and then, what are we talking? 40 years later, you're in a position, well, fewer. That's how bad my maths is. What are we? 1989, 1990. So, 30 years later, you have a position where you are in the European Union and that you have one of the most rapidly expanding economies in Europe. And there's all these sort of successes around. And I think when I talk to my Romanian friends, they'll sort of say, oh, my gosh, it's taken so long. I don't think it has. I remember speaking to my father-in-law in about 1996, something like that, and him saying, how long do you think we can be in the European Union? And I remember thinking, you're kidding me. This isn't going to happen anytime soon. This is like 30, 40, 50 years away. It wasn't actually that long after that. And we know how much had to get in place in order to meet the requirements of the European Union. So all I would say is that the journey has been long, but it's actually been quite quickly covered in comparison with many other states that haven't been able to do that well at all since having totalitarian dictatorships. So, and very briefly on my own story, my own story has been a sort of, I have a love affair with Romania, which many Romanians find intriguing and a little bit odd and maybe even crazy. But every time I come there, I feel so inspired. I want to get my notebook out and start writing. I want to go into the mountains and just observe kind of peace and tranquility. And I want to be in the old town in Bucharest and go to the bars and admire and look at the architecture. When I was there last time, I spent a lot of time just walking along the roads, pointing out different aspects of the architecture, saying that's sort of neo-French architecture. That's got an Ottoman influence. There's such an eclectic mix of architecture that I can just get excited spending days walking alone by myself in Bucharest. So I would say my rather than my own story or journey being long, it's been intense and colourful when it comes to Romania.
Well, thank you so much for your perspective. It's certainly a refreshing one, not to mention so useful to ourselves, because living here, confronting each day with Romanian realities, good or bad, probably we tend to forget to exactly what you were mentioning, to look around. And when I'm saying look around, I really mean that. Look around and feeling the city and trying to observe everything with a more distant and analytical eye. Why not? So you're obviously, Paul, fascinated with Romania and with Romanian history, the history of this land, actually, because we are talking about more Romanian countries, not only Romania, the modern Romania. It is a public fact that you are married to a Romanian lady. Well, I was wondering, had it not been this particular detail in your private life, do you think you would have still retained this fascination?
Yeah, I've thought about that quite a bit. And I've got to be honest and say probably not. If you think about it, when I came in 94, I fell in love with this woman, but I fell in love with the country at the same time. And the two became kind of conflated in my mind. So they both represent each other. So I suspect I wouldn't have been so completely in love with the country. I'd have been intrigued. I'm not sure I would have been able to have it sustained for such a long time that I would write a book about it. But it's interesting, isn't it? When I went, I mean, that personal involvement, that meshing of my now personal history and Romanian history, what it means is that when I looked back into what was happening in Romania between the wars, I remember meeting my wife, Flavia, her grandmother, and speaking about her experience in Ploiești, and first of all being bombed by the Americans because of the oil, and then being attacked by the Germans. So all that kind of stuff, it was, as I researched it more, and it all came together in my head, to have a personal stake, if you like, in that was really important, because to be able to put individuals who I've met and know well and are part of my extended family, to be able to put them in moments in history, to me, that was my motivating factor really for writing the book.
Does this love relationship with Romania also concedes a moment of resentment, even hate? Why not?
What is there any? Have I got any hate for Romania?
Yes, something you particularly dislike, you profoundly dislike from the bottom of your heart, the way you love Romania, the way you hate Romania.
Oh, well, I mean, my goodness, that's quite a delicate question, isn't it? So I can't, things that I think that I have to be really careful here about making general points, but there is something that sometimes I dislike and sometimes I love. So I select, I'll tell you what it is. And it is something that's to do with the Latin temperament. Mm-hmm. And it is the fact, obviously, that I come from a very different background, so that the English spend a lot of time never quite making the point, or making it so subtly in arguments. Nobody's quite sure where they stand. So it's all very polite.
Yes, very diplomatic, totally, yes.
Yeah, my wife would say it's exhausting. We don't know where anybody stands on anything. Everybody's sort of covering up what their true feelings are. So having my wife and her family who are more Latin, who can get cross very quickly, and I've met a lot of Romanians who are like that. Sometimes, obviously, if they have a differing point of view to mine, it's incredibly exasperating and infuriating. If they're on my side, I'm very happy with it. But that Latin temperament, I suppose, and also I suppose that over the years, particularly maybe in some of the older population of Romania, a slight pessimism about events. Mm-hmm. And I think that has... and if I'm allowed to say this, I suspect that is something that's come out of years of totalitarianism under Ceausescu. And I think it becomes something which really has infected an entire or several generations in Romania, and particularly the elder generation who got the brunt of it during their better years. It's very difficult to throw that off. And it's funny, when I talk to you excitedly about Romania, I think some young people, like you, of course, can find themselves getting excited about your own history. But I think much beyond 55, 60 people, it's more difficult. There's a pessimism, which I find a little bit disturbing.
There has been some years ago a touristic tag saying Romania simply surprising. It may have had a certain charm for the foreign visitors, but for my part, I find it obnoxious because it underlines a certain inconsistency of the people that has the potential of becoming a label, a national label. Do you have your own label, Romania related?
I sometimes think I should come and work for your tourism board, because I think I'd be better at selling Romania. I mean, seriously, I can't remember some of the adverts I've seen recently, but I always think, gosh, they undersell it. There's quite a lot about come on a cycling holiday, go and see the mountains type of thing. I mean, revisit the country's history. Now, I'm not going to be able to come up with a caption right now off the top of my head. Yes. But I would think that, in a way you have to capitalize on the fact that Romania, that people will come to Romania to see where, I'm afraid, the prisons, they will come to see what was going on under communism. They will come to see possibly, some of the landmarks that Antonescu would have been around, and Queen Marie and the Arc de Triomphe, all that, some of which means conflict or war. I don't think they should shy away from it. I think that these things need to be celebrated. Most reviews talk about the rhythm and the intricate narrative that define your book, like a true policier. Is real history the best fiction ever? Yeah, I mean, I write historical narrative, and so I try to make it sound like a story. And these are stories. And you will know as well that as journalists and writers, what we do is we find exceptional individuals, and it's really important that you make them a full character. So you understand the good and the bad in people. So you come to somebody like Codreanu or Antonescu, historians will sort of write them off and just explain what they did that was not great for Romania. But I think that to understand personally, something like Codreanu and his love of tomato farming and his love of yoga, all these, and his love of communal living, all these points, when you put them all in there and you can make a fully rounded character, I think that draws people in. So it's not, I know what you mean. It can sound, a lot of people have said, my God, you read it, it sounds like a work of fiction. But that is Romania's history for you, that it is so outlandish that it sounds like fiction.
Well, as someone with a broad view of Romania, both from the inside as from the outside, Paul, what do you think is one of the biggest prejudice about it?
I think it's a shame, isn't it? There's still a lot of prejudice. There still is in the UK. I hear people speaking Romanian in cafes or on the street, and much to my wife's embarrassment, I go over to them and I say, where are you from? And they look appalled that somebody's asked them, and then they whisper very apologetically from Romania. And why whisper? I mean, this should be celebrated. I think people need to be really bold and say, I'm from Romania. I mean, my God, it's one of the most exciting countries in Europe. But it is a shame, isn't it? There are some ignorant British people as well, and in America, who think of those who will just think Ceausescu, orphans, Dracula. And I hope that this book, the intention really was to say, please, just, if you get drawn in by Dracula, which was the hook to pull them in at the beginning of the book, once you're in it, you shouldn't be able to put it down, because there is so much more to the country. Some of it terribly bad,
yes,
but some of it very exciting and progressive.
Exactly, and characters like Queen Mary that you describe, and probably we should all be prouder of having such a character in our recent history, in our modern history, a character that Europe and the whole world should be more acquainted with.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with that. I really enjoyed writing about her, and not just because she was British. I mean, it gives the British audience another reason to draw themselves into the book. But, to be related to Queen Victoria, and then to go to Romania, not speaking the language, not knowing anything about the culture in the very early days of the country, and be in a position where, as you will know, she turned throughout her life, when she found her calling, when she went to treat troops in the trenches during the First World War and the Second Balkan War, when she's involved with that, she has an epiphany and says, she was no longer British. She felt as though she turned a corner. Her soul was Romanian. What an extraordinary story of a girl who goes there at 17 or 18 years old and ends up being something of a heroine for the country, but also in herself feels as though she's more Romanian than she is British. She converted. Her soul changed. It's an amazing thing.
Paul Kenyon, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.